Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. Uh, Today we'll be covering data from our Q3 TTP briefing. If you aren't familiar with Cybereason, we are a global company with EDR, MDR, and consulting capabilities, and we specialize in helping organizations harden against, respond to, and recover from cyber incidents. Our TTP briefing is based on threat intelligence collected from Cybereason's incident response engagements worldwide, which are tech agnostic, supplemented with data from high severity alerts from our global SOC detections. This approach reflects the attack trends, techniques, and procedures Cybereason is currently seeing in the wild and provides a realistic view of the evolving threat landscape. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and will be available after the briefing. We will have time for Q&A at the end, but we encourage you to drop your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer questions as they come in. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to provide a high-level overview of what we're seeing and what our experts will be drilling down into today. So below, you will see an outline of our top three impacted sectors, which include, unsurprisingly, financial services, manufacturing, and healthcare. For threat incident types, business email compromise accounted for the most amount of incidents in Q3, followed by ransomware and then insider threats, which our experts will dive deeper into. Finally, how are these threat actors gaining access? Most commonly, they are leveraging phishing/social engineering for their initial intrusion vector, followed by exploited vulnerabilities or CVEs, and finally, valid accounts. Now, for a more in-depth analysis of our threat landscape, I will pass it over to our speakers. Devin, do you want to kick it off?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. For those that don't know me, my name is Devin Ackerman. I am the global head of digital forensics and incident response here at Cybereason. I've been in the consulting space now for over a decade. Before that, I was a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So for nearly 2 decades, I have been focused on digital forensics investigations and responding to cyber-based threats. Jamie?
Perfect. Thank you, Devin. Hi, everybody. I am Jamie Mamro. I am an incident responder here at Cybereason. I've been doing DFIR investigations for 7.5 years now. I do specialize in business email compromises. So that's your Microsoft 365, your G Suite, and your Exchange. I know what you're thinking. Exchange is still around. It definitely is still around. So we're super excited to be here today to walk you guys through our Q3 findings. As we go along, if you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll also have a Q&A at the end as well. All right, Devin, over to you to kick it off with our key takeaways.
All right, so key takeaways from Q3, third quarter of 2025. Lull bin, living off the land binary usage. Absolutely saw an increase on this. We are going to talk about this today. We're going to talk about the types of binaries or executables that we are seeing threat actors gravitate towards and some of the techniques we're using to detect the usage of that hiding in the noise type activity from threat actors. Rate of vulnerability exploitation more than doubled based on our case intake and global visibility. Why? I think clients are doing a very good job. Insurance, brokers, law firms, we're doing a very good job educating businesses, small, medium, all the way up to enterprise and corporate clients of quickly identifying, asset managing, and fixing. But it's still one of the most popular ways in when you can find a vulnerability that gives you access, or we call remote code execution, RCE capability. We're going to continue seeing this. Insider threats. We're going to talk about the fact that what we saw in Q3, our insider threat investigations tripled in volume. Look, I don't think this is something to necessarily think the sky is falling, but our observations we have to share with you, I think, are quite insightful. Jamie?
So for the MFA piece, so we saw a higher rate of MFA implementation in Q3, but we still saw that threat actors were bypassing MFA in over 73% of the cases using modern phishing kits and using token interception.
All right. lull bins. So I teased it in the last slide. We're going to talk more about that throughout multiple of our slides today, but usage increased. What does it really mean? The investigations that we're seeing, we are seeing this increase, if you will, this pivot away from maliciousness, away from the use of malware to hiding in the noise. Look, threat actors aren't dumb. They do this for a living. They're financially motivated. And so they want, with all the effort exerted to gain access, they want to stay hidden. They want to stay below the alert, if you will, from the alerting from endpoint detection response, from next generation antivirus. So relying on behavioral monitoring, contextual analysis, it's where we not only need to move to from a global SOC perspective across incident response vendors, but it's also moving beyond just signature-based detection. Because if threat actors are using normalized tools, freeware tools, we're going to see less detections from the monitoring perspective and more hiding in the general noise of network traffic. Jamie?
Yeah, the only thing that I have to add there is really knowing what's normal will help you find the evil. So, knowing what accounts use these types of tools like PowerShell, Command Prompt, WMIC, and scheduled tasks are a couple examples, is a really good place to start. So MFA implementation was up 22% in Q3, which was great to see such a big jump in the right direction. Tailing towards the end of Q3, we had 75% having MFA enabled. So the other side to this, right, is what we talked about before, where threat actors were still able to bypass MFA in over 73% of our BEC incidents. So how are we seeing threat actors bypassing MFA? Some of the most common ones: adversary in the middle, session hijacking. We had OAuth abuse and MFA fatigue as well. So one of the big takeaways here is we should be implementing phishing resistant MFA. Couple different options for that. You have FIDO2, pass keys, hardware keys. So really moving into those methods that cannot be passed along to the threat actor. MFA alone, right? It's not a silver bullet. I feel like before it used to be, just enable MFA and you're all set. Now I think we really should tackle this with phishing resistant MFA layered with some conditional access policies. Maybe you can block non-US logins if you have people that shouldn't be logging in from there, or make it so you can only log in from registered devices, I think is a good key here.
I can't underscore that piece alone. Now, certainly geogridding is not a proverbial silver bullet. There are certainly ways threat actors will get around that. I'm sure many of our viewers today are seeing this. At the end of the day, in the logs, from a perspective of threat actor activity, when they have gained access, we're seeing an increase in the use of VPNs, the increase in usage of anonymization services, and US-based hosting services. So it's part of the fight. It helps decrease the traffic, but there's a pro and a con, or a pendulum swing to that. Now threat actors, if they're coming from a US-based IP address, they may hide in the noise. So what Jamie just pointed out, this isn't just one and done. It's a layered defense for business email compromises and fighting those. It is trying to fingerprint appropriately the hardware the device is using that should be accessing the accounts. We call these CAC policies, or conditional access policies, typically within Microsoft 365 and Azure environments. But this is in addition to MFA. It's in addition to IP address blocking. There's kind of a whole list of things we can provide if anyone is interested. Jamie, the bypass techniques in the logs that we sometimes see, you're seeing those during the investigations, correct?
Yes, you can monitor for any sign-ins. Where you'll see this is that user agent string, so how they're accessing it. You'll see something like access Python. You'll see some node fetch events maybe attached to a GitHub URL, or a couple of examples where you can see that adversary in the middle or session hijacking in your logs.
Yeah, and big call out here to both Google on their logging, but also Microsoft. We didn't used to see this in the logs going back years. Now, granted, phishing kits are becoming more sophisticated. They're almost becoming like lightweight browsers. But where we really see this is in the token replay, right? Not to go too far into the weeds on a phishing kit, but someone goes to a bad website, they enter username and password, the legitimate website passes back the MFA prompt or pushes it to the phone, you enter it in, and then the phishing kit intercepts that. But they replay it to log into the legitimate website. That's what Jamie and I are kind of referring to here. In the logs, as an example, in Microsoft's world, the unified audit logs, you actually see for the first couple of logins associated with a bad actor IP address, the user agent string that identifies uniquely the phish kit. Axios, AXIOS, is one of the most common ones we're seeing globally right now. But you'll also see, like Jamie mentioned, Python. If you can create alerts for this, is at least one way to do kind of an early canary or early radar detection of when activity is an anomalous type connection. Okay, company size breakdown for what we saw in Q3. Nice spread across revenue ranges, if you will. But basically, we are seeing increased threat actor activity against small and medium enterprises. I think there's a number of reasons for this. There's no singular reason, but the incidents typically are going to kind of be on that smaller side. I think the large enterprises typically have a bigger budget. They're more focused on supporting that. But Jamie, what else are you seeing?
Yeah, so typically those small and medium-sized enterprises, we see a lot less resources dedicated to security. This is especially true, for example, in the Microsoft portals. Microsoft has come a long way with logging, as you mentioned. So, you have Azure risky sign-ins. They do flag atypical or impossible travel, as well as anonymous IP usage. So these alerts kind of go unmonitored in those small to medium range businesses, which I think is why that percentage there is at 60%. So here are the top impacted industries that we have over time. So every industry tells a different story in DFIR. So while the attackers consistently evolve here, the fundamentals really stay the same, right? They are going to go where the data is, where the money is, or where the disruption is. Nobody is really off of their radar anymore. So no surprise here, right? Financial services remains at the top. I will say too that I feel like have remained consistent throughout the years that I've been doing this are the education and the healthcare industries. We do see them being frequent ransomware and BEC targets due to the open environments, decentralized IT, and some of those understaffed security teams. Towards the tail end of Q3, some of the latest stats we were seeing, in the September range was a lot more G Suite education tenants were being impacted. So I suspect that we'll see a big increase there for Q4 in the education industry.
Yeah, everyone returning back to school. Threat actors track it just as much. They want to disrupt schools getting back to normal after the kind of the post-summer shutdown, if you will, from students not being there every day. And if they can interrupt school getting back up, whether it's higher education or the K-12 type school systems here in America and in North America, they're going to do that, right? Because it creates an earnestness for that problem to be fixed, potentially them to be paid, and they know they can interrupt that. It's very similar to what we see kind of in healthcare, where they know that there's a high impact to taking down a healthcare, a hospital's network, a doctor's office, because it directly impacts their ability to deliver care. One thing I want to call here was the nonprofit stat. So it's kind of interesting, right? 2 to 3% to a 6% jump for at least for our part of the global incident response pie. But one big call here is typically we see with not-for-profit organizations, 501Cs, they do not usually have as kind of the focus or the IT security type budget. One thing I want to call out here is if you're in the not-for-profit and you're watching this today or in the future, work with your insurance broker and your cyber insurance carrier, because there are often proactive services that can be done that are actually delivered to you by the carrier and sometimes in lockstep with vendors like Cybereason. But anything we can help do to raise that bar of security when we know funding is maybe a little tighter than it is in other industry segments.
So BEC, unsurprisingly, remained the top threat incident type. They accounted for 46% of our incidents, which was up from 37% for H1. So attackers are increasingly sophisticated. They are using AI phishing, MFA bypass techniques, as well as social engineering. The other part to this is, the remote work and our reliance on email for our financial workflows really makes organizations more vulnerable to the BEC attacks. Ransomware remained the second most common incident type at 39% for Q3.
So let's talk about insider threats here, right? Insider threats, specifically our category is intentional insider threats. You can have unintentional users that have placement and access to an organization and they just make a mistake. They upload data to a cloud sharing platform and they leave that open. They send an email with an attachment with personally identifiable information, PII, potentially send that email to the wrong person, right? There's unintentional spillage or risk incurred sometimes with kind of the control of data. But our category here is specific to intentional insider threats. And the big jump we saw and have seen this year, like many other vendors in the space, are North Korean remote worker schemes. Why? Look, the schemes are a way to generate currency, money used to circumvent international sanctions. So we're seeing definitely a rise of this. There's some estimates that it's tens of millions of dollars, US dollars, being routed back. And there's even some intelligence to support that it's upwards of 90% of those proceeds are going back to fund the government. In addition to financial gain, we and others have seen it, and there's intelligence from our investigations to suggest that in some of the engagements, there is collection and copying out of data from the environment they have access to. I don't think it's all of those. We have seen many where it's just, they're getting a paycheck and they're not actually delivering the work. They last for potentially 4-6 weeks before they're caught. Well, look, that's 2 to 3 paychecks and they're routing that money out and they're usually doing 5, 6, 10 of these jobs in parallel and they're just doing it for the financial gain piece. For those that we do see data being exfiltrated, it's usually copying out of data. It's usually internal intellectual property, guides, technical write-ups, technical knowledge from internal wikis, SharePoints. So something to be mindful of there when you kind of see mass new employee access to internal wikis or databases. One last thing to call out for this. Typically, these schemes, specifically with North Korea remote worker schemes, they're propagated through these mass laptop farms. The laptops aren't staying with one individual. They're getting reshipped to a potential area. And that's how organizations like Cybereason and others that are doing managed detection response, we see anomalous activity with IP addresses across the fleet. So one takeaway from this for all of you watching, if you are an organization, you work with an MSSP, a managed security services provider like us, or another vendor out there, you should look and ask proactively for the intelligence they have around anomalous IP address activity, specifically for your new employees, your remote workers, because they may actually be able to flag the IP and say, hey, this location where these IP addresses are, we're actually seeing that across multiple businesses globally, and this may be indicative of a laptop farm and suspiciousness there. Okay, so let's talk ransomware specific. So our top observed variance is on the right of the slide, our attack type distribution on the left. And you can read the variants. I'm going to talk about the high activity ones, but let's talk about encryption and exfiltration and extortion for a minute here. Most organized and e-crime focused groups or extortion gangs, whatever you want to call them, threat actors with a financial motivation. They are typically in today's day and age, and as you can see from the stats, 71% of our engagements, exfiltrating data, encrypting data, and using the duality of that attack to extort. 21% of our investigations, we're seeing exfiltration, no encryption. And in 9% of our investigations in Q3, encryption only, no data exfil. So very meaningful here. So let's talk about our specific groups. Akira, initial access and their exploit capabilities, their heavy reliance on CVEs, which we have a separate slide for that shortly, but heavy use of VPN, so targeting sonic walls, targeting Fortinets, and also without MFA, but also potentially without patching. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the sonic wall stuff here shortly. Their distinct tradecraft for Akira, at least in our observation, they are capable of dual encryptor deployments. They have encryptors that they can deploy in Linux environments or Linux servers. And they have, of course, their encryptor there that's well known or more better known on the Windows side. They typically will also target the ESXi servers. They usually will log in as root. Most ESXi deployments are not MFA. They are also, quite unfortunately, default passwords we are finding. And so they will log in as root, they launch a script, and they deploy the ransomware to stop all the VMs and then encrypt those VMs. They have a heavier reliance on the Rust programming language, which does have some fairly heavy obfuscation capabilities built into it. They also have a heavy reliance on Mimikatz and Lazane for credential harvesting. So again, both of those are fairly well known from a signature matching within AV and EDR, but normally by then they're usually about halfway through the intrusion path, and they can go loud a little bit. They love advanced IP scanner in our experience, typically to kind of scan the environment. And for data exfil, they rely on rclone, WinSCP. We do see WinRAR for the packaging of data, and FileZilla for exfil. Let's talk about Quillin for a second. Quillin was formerly known as Agenda. For those of you that have kind of been working that threat actor for a while, they lean heavily, like Kira, on VPN, but also exposed applications like Citrix. They love Citrix farms. They love searching for those. There have certainly been some Citrix vulnerabilities in the last 3 to 6 months. We also have seen them kind of a little more heavier on the Fortinet side, and there's some 2024 CVEs that they're well known for. Their encryptors, then their affiliate panel options, one unique or distinct aspect of them that for our legal community and our legal listeners, they actually have right built into their control panels or their affiliate panels on their side, not the victim side, but on their control side. They actually have a call lawyer button that we have seen through intelligence operations. And that call lawyer is really that we have seen them use it. They will actually invoke that to kind of pester or harass the lawyers, whether internal, general counsel, or external through outside. So something to be aware of there. Ink ransomware. One unique call out for them, they are well known for rebooting systems, specifically Windows systems, into safe mode for the purposes of disabling EDR, disabling antivirus, or at least severely reducing those protections so that they can encrypt those systems. They are also known for mass printer note spamming. They will typically pool the jobs. So sometimes our clients, once they're starting to restore operations and the printers come back online, they suddenly think they panic because they think they've been hit again. It's just the printers doing a prior spooled print job. Very annoying, but also effective to kind of disrupt and extort a client. Last one, let's talk about Medusa for a quick second. Really well known for exploiting Exchange, not in the traditional mailbox end goal though, for deploying remote management tools. So they will use a lot of the common Exchange exploits we've seen in recent years. They will find Exchange server. They will typically use that to deploy an RMM tool to the host level, and then use that as a foothold into the environment.
Perfect. So moving into dwell time here. So how Cybereason measures dwell time is from the initial date of compromise until the IR team was engaged. So also, this is all of our data combined. So this is ransomware data, BEC data, the insider data. This is from our consulting clients only, so not our MDR data. But from what we've seen, the BEC dwell time is typically longer. So, it could be up to a month after when somebody's following up about a missed payment or when an account sends outbound spam. Also with BECs, we've seen cases where we have an initial login and then we have a pretty big gap, right, of no logins, no activity. Could be 7 to 14 days. Maybe they caught a bigger fish. Maybe they were selling the creds. And then we see that activity pick back up. So, I think that the BEC data here really might skew the data a bit, and maybe why we're seeing, that 38% falling into that 31 plus day dwell time here.
So one thing I want to talk about a little bit here is kind of the initial access broker. We call them IABs, initial access broker. Most people, I think that most modern intrusions are very quick. And you're right. Typically when the threat actor, whatever their end goal is, outside of a nation state or government-sponsored hack type context, most organized e-crime, financially motivated threat actors move very quickly. The dwell time, just keep it in perspective. It's from the earliest evidence of unauthorized access, which is often by an IAB. So let's talk about IABs for just a second. If you've not heard the term before, you've not really heard of this concept before, think of them. And if you've ever heard me do my talks, I love using the house analogy. So think of an initial access broker as just a burglar who doesn't actually want to rob the house. Their whole goal, their specialty, is in compromising the lock to the house and reselling that access to another criminal. The other criminal is the one that wants to come in and actually rob the house, right? So think of this in the context of a brand new vulnerability for name your favorite application. They are the initial access brokers are to collect the credentials. They're there to collect the VPN, the RDP, the Citrix username and password that works, potentially plant some type of remote access tool on the inside, and then resell the access. It's the ransomware or data extortion type motivated threat actor skipping the hard work and just launching right into the intrusion. So just to underscore what Jamie mentioned there, both in the email, the business email compromise context, but in the network intrusion context, sometimes there's the initial access event, the initial intrusion vector. Then there's a lull with really little to no activity. Then the new actor comes in and they launch into the intrusion path, hence our timetable. Okay, we're not going to spend too long on this slide, but it helps frame the last few points we want to make on today's live stream. Our intrusion path, Cybereason's intrusion path, breaks things, complicated stories down into really 5 phases. And so we're going to walk through the common tools, the tactics, techniques, the processes we see across these 5 phases. But most all of our investigations break into these, right? From more of a layman's terminology. You have an initial intrusion vector, how they got in, some way they've maintained persistence, some way they've maintained how they're going to regain access, the remote access capability. Typically, they need to escalate their privileges. They need to gain heightened ability within the environment. They need to move from a normal non-privileged account to a privileged account, from a normal user to a service or administrator account. Then there's data at risk. They have viewed access to required something, whether it's for escalation or it's later for data extortion or it's to fulfill an intelligence collection requirement because they're nation state based. And then there's the end goal. Every threat actor has an end goal. They may not always reach it. They may be ejected or contained before they reach it, but there's still an end goal. They're not just breaking indoors. Going back to my house analogy, there's a goal here. So whether that's encryption of data, to extort you for data they stole, monetization arguably could be all of these, or business interruption, right? Potentially from an corporate espionage perspective. So that's the high level intrusion path. Now let's start breaking down the data we have for each of the phases. Jamie?
Perfect. So yes, so phishing remained the top intrusion vector at 50% for Q3. One thing about phishing emails is they've really come a long way. They no longer have the crazy font, the grammar or spelling errors that we used to see. So it's really important to bridge the gap here between IT and our employees. IT, us and DFIR, we see these advancements in phishing every day. So we know what to look for, but some of our non-technical end users don't, which is why I think it's important to conduct regular phishing testing and training, maybe including, an MFA part or including a latest trend. We see them love the end of year with the bonuses and the review timeframes or the benefits and open enrollment timeframe, so making sure that the users understand that these phishing emails, now the site that it brings you to looks extremely similar to the legitimate Microsoft login page. The other part that I would like to add would be, making sure that everybody has a way to report the suspicious email and that there's an open line of communication there that they can self-report. I understand that, a lot of people don't want to get in any kind of trouble, so they don't want to report it. But we have seen an uptick here in users self-reporting, which really does cut down on that dwell time that we were talking about. So making sure that they know, if they clicked an email and they come to you guys, that it's quicker to get it cleaned up that way, and the risk reduces a lot that way. So I would say when it comes to phishing, when in doubt, report that email to your security team. contact the sender on an outside method. So call them on a known good phone number is a good option, not the one that you're seeing in the email signatures. And just really training, I think, would help bring this number down here for phishing.
Yeah. One I want to touch on is CVEs, exploited vulnerabilities. Now, look, in network intrusions, enterprise intrusions, typically they're coming in through the perimeter. They're exploiting a vulnerability in a firewall, a VPN appliance, an external facing server. Not always. Sometimes you have the ability to log directly in because someone has visit a website, download a tool, and that tool gives you remote access. So by nature of the exploit, you automatically have access to an endpoint. But most of the time, the higher percentage is exactly what you're seeing here. And in Q3 for us, it doubled. More than double of our intrusion investigations, we were able to link back either through logs, forensic evidence, totality of circumstances with high confidence back to a particular CVE. Kind of amazing when you think about it that threat actors clients are doing a good job patching, but threat actors are doing even a faster job in the shorter time frame they have, usually leveraging initial access brokers in our opinion or our experience, to quickly leverage the exploits once they're packaged. I'll give you a quick example on this, or a war story. We know of the vulnerability related to the Oracle vulnerability that came out for their SBE application. Many of our investigations, when we were called and look at those, we could actually track from a timeline perspective the announcement of the vulnerability, the initial group that was using the vulnerability that everyone knows about, and then the follow-on threat actors. Sometimes within 7 to 12 hours of the announcement, we started seeing scans and attempts to exploit the vulnerability. Very, very quick, very, very fast. Okay, so let's keep moving. So I do not think it is much of a surprise to many of you that Akira has been leveraging sonic wall vulnerabilities at scale in mass over the last probably 2 quarters worth. And it is not so much that clients were not patched for the vulnerabilities, it is that the prior vulnerabilities that we believe, and as much of the intelligence community believes, or has assessed, that they were able to leverage the prior vulnerability, collect credentials, and then even on a patch device, still leverage those stored credentials that may have been migrated post-patch to continue accessing and exploiting. But we've also had incidents in which the devices were not fully up to date. As you can clearly see here, the overwhelming majority of vulnerabilities or initial intrusion vectors in our intrusion path, phase 1, is heavily weighted to external VPN appliances and firewall devices, with really the top 2, top left being the exceptions here. On-premise Microsoft SharePoint servers related to that CVE, as well as the Gladinet Center Stack CVE. We have had a number of those. But almost everything else here, very well-known manufacturers, very respected manufacturers that have vulnerabilities. Every VPN appliance, every firewall out there has had a vulnerability at some point in time. These are just the most common ones we're seeing. And you'll notice one common, the CVSS score is typically for these CVs quite high, meaning that there's usually either a small amount of chaining between exploits or it's direct access, remote code access, exploitation capability to be able to gain access into the environment or to credentials. Okay, persistence. So now we're in phase 2 of our intrusion path, kind of talking through what we saw in Q3. Give you a minute to take a look at the slide, but what's the overwhelming thing you're probably seeing? Freeware and non-malware. So threat actors are very commonly, whether they're nation state or they are organized e-crime focused, they're leveraging tools that are really going to typically not fire alerts with managed detection response, security operations center type setups, or endpoint detection response without customized playbooks. Cybereason, others, we set up playbooks for this. We set up playbooks for these tools, not to necessarily knock and block because they're legitimate usage, but in the totality of detection, the totality of circumstances, is this brand new IP address? Is this brand new system? Is this username supposed to be using this tool? Is it a brand new usage of the tool? Was it prior approved? It's the totality of circumstances. But again, notice the overwhelming amount of tools here, freely downloadable, and they are not by nature malicious. So the techniques being most commonly leveraged, this is our top list for threat actors maintaining persistence and maintaining kind of lateral movement capability or early reconnaissance within an environment. Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really important note there is that, a lot of EDR is not going to detect these by default. So we may need rules set up in place. So that's why, Cybereason recommends only allow listing what you currently use and then blocking the others. We had one a few weeks ago where an admin used Advanced IP Scanner years ago, forgot to delete it. Then the threat actor got in and started using it. So, we didn't see that initial download, but we started to see that being used. So sometimes these are also tools that we use for legitimate reasons that we don't clean up. Another fun one that we had was an admin was running a script to show where the most important or most used files were. The threat actor was able to go in, grab their most important files. Obviously, the admin meant to delete this. It was used to kind of increase security around those important files. But again, just really wanted to stress that cleaning up after you use these tools for legitimate reasons is always best practice.
100%. And look, it's hard to manage large, medium enterprises. And not only do you have IT asset management, you have OT asset management, you have all of the cloud aspects of management, then you have to manage the software on those. Like we don't say these things lightly. We understand it from a defender, from an incident response perspective. But I want to give a quick shout out or war story here for Advanced Port Scanner. It's in our persistence list. We had a recent investigation in which we were looking through, we were itemizing post-boom, if you will, post-incident. We were called into the investigation, and we found evidence of what we believe was suspicious activity within our timeline, within our path of intrusion, and we called it out. The client's response was, no, that's actually a legitimate tool. We use that. And we said, well, we believe you, and we do see legitimate usage, but on this server at this date and time with this account. And the client, upon inspection, was like, oh, that actually is not us. I think this is completely understandable. We get it. These are legitimate tools, freeware tools largely, and they are tools used by internal IT teams. The thoroughness by which you do the inventory management is a big piece here. Should the user at the date and time on the system in question be using the tool? Not just true, false, yes, no, is the tool in use? So the context really matters here.
Perfect. So moving into phase 3 here, escalation. So this is where the threat actors start to make some noise. They're using third-party malware. So your EDR at this point should be lighting up like a Christmas tree. The top tools that we saw used were Mimikatz and PowerShell. We also saw SharpHound and DC Sync as well. We do still see a lot of places relying on AV to pick these up. So really ask yourself, do you have a tool in place that would catch these? And if your answer is yes, is there somebody actively monitoring those alerts and able to respond and review to them in a timely manner?
I couldn't agree with you more, Jamie. And I'll add something to kind of underscore this. We had the earlier slide, no need to go back. We had the earlier slide about the dwell times, right? The time from the initial access broker to the actual intrusion. If we were to really show, and look, I know a lot of the defenders that are watching us today will agree with this will resonate with, but to really drive home, most financially motivated threat actors are in it to smash and grab. Find the data, exfil the data, prep the encryption, boom, move on to the next victim. They're monetizing. Their end goal is financial benefit. They're not there for the long haul. And most of these intrusion paths, where years and years ago it was weeks, and look, we do have 31 days, but that's from initial access broker with a lull to the actual timeline of intrusion. A majority of our intrusions are compressing down. We're seeing it, and as many partners and other vendors are seeing, we're going from what used to be 2-3 days to hours. So think of that from a perspective. Can your SOC, can your managed detection response vendor that is monitoring the environment generate an alert for something suspicious within a very short SLA and action it so they can actually contain and eject a threat? So if a threat actor only needs 4 to 5 hours, Is the SOC going to meaningfully generate an alert, meaningfully respond to that, contain it, and be able to keep you pre-ransomware if the threat actor is moving very, very fast? Okay. All right. Data at risk. So there's a big piece I want to drive home here, especially for the legal, for the insurance, and for our clients that are watching here. Data at risk should always be viewed in two buckets, not just one. I think very commonly in our industry, we look at data at risk as, what did the threat actor take? Can we get the file listing? Can we understand exactly what it is they took? Yes, what they exfiltrated or acquired, very important, very thorough typically, usually the largest bucket of data. But what we do not want to miss, and what we do not miss here at Cybereason on the investigative side, is what was viewed or accessed during the path of intrusion. Because it's not always just what was taken, which is everything. It may be the largest percentage, but it's also was viewed or accessed. And we've commonly seen where threat actors during the path of intrusion, they're probing. I'll go back to my house analogy. They're opening the doors in your house to figure out what's in the rooms. They may not take something in the room, but they view it. They now know it's in there. So we have seen threat actors where they've opened documents, they've accessed wiki pages, they have viewed emails and email accounts. They may not have taken the things out, or there may not be evidence to suggest or support they took it, but they viewed it. So we always, the totality of evidence we have, try to also include that data, because that data may include more usernames and passwords. It may include configuration settings. It may include how your firewall is configured. It may include IP addresses for shadow IT infrastructure. So data at risk for us is data that, yes, in 45% of our investigations, data that was exfiltrated. But we're also looking at in 42% of our investigations, data that was only viewed or accessed is part of the data at risk overall bucket. And we're providing that data for our client, our law firms. 7% of our investigations where there was actually a data staging event, meaning they took data, they copied it within the organization to another internal location, they staged it, usually compressed, then they exfiltrated. 6% of our investigations where data was modified or altered. Not something we typically see in high volume for organized crime, e-crime, financially motivated groups. Again, their focus is, how do I find it? How do I exfil it? But 6% is notable because typically it's going to be our insider threats trying to cause destruction and disruption. And there are some de minimis amount of cases in which we have threat actors that are modifying or altering data to create or enhance the business interruption impact post-boom. Jamie?
Yes, so definitely a lot of WinSCP usage in Q3. We had one where the threat actors were able to download WinSCP, set it up, add their destination address, all within 5 minutes. So, then they started to grab data, but in this case, they were moving data very quickly. They were able to get the tool, get it set up in a very quick time frame. So again, and stressing the importance of the EDR alert response times here. Okay, so the threat actor end goals. So as anticipated, financial gain remains at the top for threat actor end goal at 45%. So for BECs, this could be a wire fraud, an invoice or payment fraud, payroll misdirection. We really wanted to emphasize the importance here of having multiple verification steps for any financial changes. So we talked a little bit before about that out-of-band communication. So always verifying this via an independent method from email. So phone call to a known good number, not the one you get off Google, not the one that you see in the email signatures. You can do face-to-face verification or use a secure messaging platform. Another thing that we've seen be successful here in stopping the financial gain is having a dual approval. So requiring at least 2 independent approvals for any financial changes. Had a BEC the other day where the threat actor compromised one of the finance employees, but they weren't able to get the other one. And they needed both here to change any wire or ACH information. So for that case, the dual approval approach saved them from wiring $100,000 to the wrong account. So really having strong financial protocols written alone isn't enough. There should be a combination here of technical controls, human checks to make sure, right, that folks are following those policies, as well as continuous monitoring.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly, Jamie. The only thing I want to add here is the 4%, while small, for espionage and intelligence gathering. Look, there are threat actor groups, and I think most of us know this. There are threat actor groups, though, where their goal is really not encryption of data. It's intelligence gathering. Whether you are a large airline and you have information upon travelers, you're a hotel industry and you have information on travelers, or you are an organization that processes credit card data and you are trying to steal the credit card information. Regardless of the data you have, the way you control it, the way you secure it, there are threat actor groups that are just looking to collect that intelligence to understand another bigger end goal. We see this commonly with software manufacturers, software developers. They want to get in, they want to identify what exploits may exist because the developer is not the goal. A user of the software is the end goal. So what better way than to compromise a pen tester, compromise the software developer, look for the bug bounty program, and just engage in espionage and the data exploit or intelligence gathering around those exploits so you can chain them and use them later.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. What a great session. We've had a couple of questions come in. So here, the first one is on the screen here. Once the attack is underway and we see these phishing kits in the logs, what sort of tools should be considered to trigger high quality alerts? Is it EDR or SIEM or something else? This is referring back to the MFA question.
Jamie, you want to take that one, or you want me to take a stab at it?
Go ahead.
I think, Alex, to your question, which is a great one, it's a totality of the tools you have, right? So there are certain clients that don't have a SIM or a SIEM set up. Well, if you're a Microsoft 365 client, set up the actual Azure type Sentinel reporting to take advantage of this. Sometimes that is an increase in your licensing level, but use the tools that are default. If you are using a company like Cybereason that has an MDR capability, ask specifically the MSSP you're working with, hey, what integrations do I have for email? Because like Cybereason, we have the ability to tie in to cloud environments, and we will build custom rules, custom alerts right out of the box based on your email application, whether you're using Google, Microsoft 365, traditional on-prem Exchange, or some other flavor. We just really need to get the data and then turn it into an actionable alerting system. But yes, incident response vendors like us, like Jamie and I and our teams, we have access to the data. We can help work with clients based on their tech stack to build meaningful alerts so they're not covered up in just meaningless noise.
Yes, absolutely. And also looking at the unified audit logs, a lot of admins are able to go in and pull those, check those user agent strings. As Devin mentioned, in Microsoft, you can set up additional licensing where, you don't have to be actively monitoring the Azure portal. It can actually fire off emails for risky sign-ins, atypical travel to the global administrators, but it does require additional setup in Microsoft, and it's not the easiest thing to actually enable. There are quite a few steps there to get that in place, but that is another option as well on the email side of things.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. We do have another question that's come in, but I want to encourage everyone that's on the line to drop your questions in the chat, and Devin and Jamie will tackle them. So the next question we have is, how are companies detecting this insider threat? This is going back to those North Korea remote worker scams.
So I gave one example of working with your MSSP, your MDR provider, so your managed security services provider or your managed detection response provider, and asking for whatever intelligence they have on that particular threat. I know Cybereason, we have deliverables we've put out there, but again, that provider with their global visibility potentially can look for anomalous activities or these laptop type farms. Secondarily, it does take a different investigative hat, so to speak. Looking for insider threats, you're looking for someone who already is at the keyboard with a legitimate login, doing probably legitimate things, but the mindset they're utilizing is to use the placement and access for wrong. So bluntly, working with a consultant, working with someone who has experience doing insider threat investigations, because they're not the traditional isolate computer, rebaseline computer type IT approach. Not saying anything bad about that. It's just a different approach. With the last piece I'll add here, typically with insider threats, as soon as you start raising the noise, they know they've been found. So there's also more of a controlled approach to these types of investigations. Often when we're engaged based on our law enforcement backgrounds to do these investigations, direction of counsel, we are doing these kind of in a very tight group, usually sometimes operating just with the CEO, maybe one or two members of IT, and that's it. There's no mass deployment of tools. It's something where we are being not clandestine, not trying to over sensationalize it, but we're doing it in a very careful approach. So working with a vendor who has experience and background in doing insider and threat investigations, the detection piece is through the techniques, is through the tools without raising too much of an alert to the normal users in the organization.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin. So that is the end of our session. I want to thank both Devin and Jamie for speaking today and for everyone else who tuned in to watch. As mentioned, a recording will be made available after we finish. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or need any additional support, please reach out to us at response@cybereason.com. Thank you and have a great day.
So.